Today I continued to work with Dakota on moving, halting, and facing up. I do use the rope, but rarely put pressure on it. The rope was there mostly for him to get used to it. In many ways, Dakota is moving faster than Aries in the gentling process. But in other key areas, he is much slower. There are consequences to growing up without a real family herd. When Dakota was taken from his mother, much earlier than he would have been in the wild, he was likely put with other young male horses his age. At the corrals, the horses are separated by sex and age, for good reason. But this denies the horses a true social structure. So Dakota and the other young male horses he lived with basically made up their own rules. With no adult horses as role models, this means Dakota doesn't have a full social toolkit. So when I ask him to yield and respect my authority, he doesn't respond the way an adult Mustang would. So not only am I gentling him, I am teaching him how to respond to social cues. You may have noticed the scars on his back. Aries is giving him some lessons as well, and Aries is a much tougher teacher. You may also notice Dakota is a bit dramatic at times. He likes to run around and buck, sometimes for fun, sometimes in protest. This is what another trainer and I like to call baby drama. In the wild, Mustangs learn to hide their emotions. It doesn't serve them well to show when they are frightened. Dakota is, I believe, at heart, a sweet guy, and he wants to please and get it right. He has a lot to learn, but he seems to be enjoying the journey. Today was the first day for Aries in the round pen. The pen is not entirely round. There are 2 corners at either end of the wall that makes up his shelter. Mustangs can get stuck in zones like that. My friend Kathy explained it best when she said Mustangs are like water when they move. They can get stuck in eddies, like a corner. But as long as I give Aries clear directions on where to go, he avoids getting caught in these corners. I wanted Aries to work in the round pen for a little while to get used to it, but planned on doing more confined work on facing up in his usual pen. I can pretty reliably get him to face up to me now. The horses you see behind Aries are Mustang mares that have been gentled. Aries has them wrapped around his little finger. He is quite the Romeo. Here Aries turns his hindquarters towards me. So I tapped him on the croup and made him move forward. That is an unacceptable behavior. In between asking him to face up, I offer my hand for him to sniff. Today he was still tentative and unsure about sniffing my hand, but he was getting more confident. I try never to go into the pens with the Mustangs with an agenda or a list of things I want to accomplish that day. I go in there and see what each horse wants to offer me today. Today, Dakota was in a lovey mood. He seems to be moodier than Aries. There are days he doesn't want to think much and protests by running around and being a young guy. Other days, he clearly wants to be loved and petted. This was one of those days. So I took the opportunity to try and touch Dakota all over. I have found Mustangs, at least initially, don't like to be patted. The smacking motion, however gentle it may be, is jarring to them. So I have to remember to always keep my hand on him and be consistent. He is slightly uncomfortable with my hand on his stomach. You can see him raise his back ever so slightly. And of course, what you do on the right, you must do on the left. It took a little bit of convincing to get Dakota to let me get on his left side. I spent more time on the upper neck and face. These areas are very sensitive areas for a horse. That's where a predator would grab them to kill them. So they are understandably touchy about these areas. But almost all of the work we do with horses involves communicating with them using their heads, halters, bridles, bits, etc. There are of course ways to communicate that don't involve the head at all. But for practical reasons, both Dakota and Aries will need to get used to having their heads handled. This is a very short section on Aries. I am mostly showing it to you for comparison purposes. This was Saturday morning, around 10:30 a.m. This was how Aries was with me. He was the same as Friday. Curious, but still very unsure and very reserved. I think Aries had an epiphany sometime on Saturday, because on Sunday, he began to walk towards me. There is no video from Sunday, but Monday's video shows the same behavior as Sunday. Wait till you see it. It was like a different horse had stepped into his skin. This was Dakota's first time in the outside round pen. As I mentioned earlier, there are two corners, and Dakota got caught in both of them. Repeatedly. The corners would just catch his forward motion, and like an eddy in a stream, he would get stuck. It took a few spins around the round pen before he understood I wanted him to keep moving. And he did it in typical Dakota dramatic fashion. But after a while, he started to settle down and actually pay attention to what I was saying. Like Aries, I want Dakota to stop and face up to me. Once he is faced up, I will then move around to ask him to yield his hindquarters away from me. As discussed in a previous episode, this is a submissive and respectful act on his part. By crossing over his hind feet and yielding away from me, Dakota is not only showing respect, he is also making himself quite vulnerable. Crossed legs are not conducive to running away. Here I am trying to angle myself in such a way that I draw his front end around with, in this case, the left side of my body, while simultaneously pushing his hind end away with the right side of my body. Not an easy thing to do. Dakota was a good sport, as usual. And now for Aries. I was completely blown away by him on Sunday. I remember standing there, reaching out to him, and when he walked towards me, I believe the words I said were, "Oh my God." I think my friend has a short clip of it on her phone. I will try to get it. This was a totally new thing for him. It may have something to do with being in a bigger space. He may feel more comfortable. Whatever the reason, I am thrilled he is making the choice to approach me. The next step is to solidify the hindquarter yield. I need him to remain submissive and respectful. The goal is to be able to walk a full 360-degree circle around him, all while he keeps faced up to me. Here I attempt to get a yield and lose him. In order to get him to yield the hind end, I have to draw the front end as well. After each sniff, I draw back and turn to walk a circle around towards his hindquarters, asking for the yield, and releasing when he gives it. Now I attempt the left side yield. Aries has chosen to offer me his right side during most of this exercise. As with all things, one side is easier than the other. He is quite stubborn about his left side, and I lose him. I am quite certain, no, positive, this breakdown in communication is my fault. I have to discover how to ask the question correctly to get the response I want. Pat Pirelli once said, "If your horse says no, you either asked the wrong question or you asked the question wrong." But Aries and I will get there. I have no doubt of that. the more repetitions we did on the right, the further around I was able to get Aries to yield. Progress on the right. The left would come around, so to speak, eventually. Mustangs, and horses in general, love repetition and consistency. Repeating this exercise of asking him to halt, drawing him in, and getting him to sniff my hand was rewarding for Aries as well as for me. I had a friend tell me I must be the most patient person to work with Mustangs. I have to admit, I am not a patient person at all. The reason I don't get impatient with Mustangs is that they reward me as well, usually many times in one session. Each time they get or learn something, I get rewarded just as they do. As always, I am left in awe of these horses. Before me, most of their experiences with humans can probably best be described as traumatic. And yet they are willing to forgive and take a leap of faith, putting themselves out there and trusting an animal every instinct they have is telling them will hurt them. And yet they try anyway. A quote I found by an unknown author sums it up. At its finest, rider and horse are joined not by tack, but by trust. Each is totally reliant upon the other. Each is the selfless guardian of the other's very well-being.